Hi team, welcome to the session on Coffee with Prab. And today we have a special guest, Mr. Harshil Shah. When you're talking about the introduction of Harshil, before I talk about his past, let me tell you about his present. Okay, very active guy right now in a lot of conferences. So I think B-side is basically one of the one which he is actively involved. And he was in a news last year, okay, where he basically got the first position in, I think, CTF, right? It's more like a
That's
cyber, yeah. But the interesting part about Harshil is basically he started his journey from AI and data science, right? Harshil, correct me if I'm wrong. And from AI, and then he did the transition to cybersecurity, where he hold multiple certifications like OSCP, CRTP, and the best thing is, which I like about one of the certification is this guy is also a CISSP. So team, if you can see the pattern, came from a background of data science, AI, and then moved to the cybersecurity where he was into red teaming. He do red teamings also, and holding then certification like OSCP, which is I think dream certification for every pen tester, and CISSP also at the very young age. And one more important thing is that currently he working for the company in Middle East where he involved in AI and all that. And today I believe this is the first kind of a video we are building where we're talking about AI gen, more from the impact of offensive and defensive. So thanks Harshil to taking out the time for this particular session. I'm sure after this video my subscriber count is going to be increased, and you also doing a lot of sessions on offensive in India, and I can see that some trainings are lined up in April also.
correct. Thanks, Prab. Yeah, I think training at B-Sides Goa in the end of April. So watch out for that space. It's a purely red teaming based training that's going to be coming for folks who are interested in how to obtain initial access in organizations. So that's going to be an interesting one.
Thanks Harshil. See, the thing is the team, today's session we are talking about the AI gen or AI gen, with the impact of offensive and defensive. What is the role of AI gen in the offensive and the defensive, and it's more from a disruptive perspective. Now, why this session is authentic? Because the guy who's sitting in front of me, he's basically came from a AI background. So it's not something, okay, he came from a BCA and then he did offensive and then he learned for 6 months data science and then he become engineer. No, he spent his good amount of time. He did studies in AI and data science. So I'm sure this session will be a insightful session where he will share his thoughts and his wisdom, his knowledge, his experience on AI Gen and how it is basically play an important role in cybersecurity. So Harshil, over to you. We're talking about this
Okay.
buzzword AI Gen or AI. So could you please explain this to these people who are watching this video who came from a background who have a zero visibility about data science and cybersecurity?
For sure. Thanks, Prab. So, Prab, Gen AI, or as we call it, generative AI, for sure has been a game changer for not just cybersecurity, but a world full of domains, right? You can say copyright, marketing, sales, every domain. Gen AI has been a game changer for risk and security, especially owing to its factors like boost to productivity, the security data accessible via prompts, risk predictions, task automation, and a personal favorite is the lowered bar for entry, right? You need to do less amount of research to be able to perform complex tasks because information is so accessible at your hand. And if we see, it's almost like a landscape shift that has happened, right? Because earlier there was a time when artificial intelligence was this thing where people were very scared of. It's like, oh, robots are going to be taking over something, and let's not use artificial intelligence. However, now it's almost as if a product, if it does not embed AI principles, it's considered uncool, right? So AI is become that key component for every product to even be able to sell itself in terms of unique selling point. Um, Coming to generative AI specifically, right, which is
Hmm.
a very specific category of artificial intelligence. And for the viewers, maybe in a second, I'll just clear these different terms: AI, ML, deep learning,
Please,
Gen AI,
please, please.
right? So AI is essentially the science that is devoted to making machines think and act like humans. That's the overarching bracket, within which falls machine learning. And in machine learning, you are essentially enabling computers to perform tasks without explicit programming, right? So you don't need to program a specific code to be able to predict something. They want computers to learn from existing data using certain mathematical functions and then predict for data that the computer has not seen yet, within which comes uh, another technique called deep learning, right? So it's a subset of machine learning that works on a specific technology called artificial neural networks, right? And artificial neural networks, from its very terminology, is intuitive that it has something to do with neurons, right? And that's essentially what it is. Neurons in our brain are connected to each other in multiple different connections. And essentially, artificial neural networks are also just nodes and nodes and nodes of data and other mathematical values that are connected to each other to derive the best features from the data given to it and be able to extract information in a way that allows them to predict new data,
Okay.
right? So this is AI, ML, and deep learning. Now, Gen AI is a subset of AI that focuses on producing new content,
Okay.
right? Generative AI, it can use algorithms or like stable diffusion, etc. And ultimately, what it is doing, it is generating outputs such as text output, images, music, audio, right? So I've constantly been looking at some very, very cool AI tools coming up these days, not just Chat GPT and Gemini, but I think things like Midjourney, things like Beautiful.ai, which are creating automatic presentations at this point. We are things like Midjourney, which are generating brilliant quality
Images.
pictures that are used. So, generative AI is essentially learning patterns from the data and it's using it for new content.
Great.
And the fundamental technology, I'm not going to get into the exact way the algorithm works, but at an overarching layer, the fundamental way that it is built is something called generative adversarial networks, which people in data science call GAN, right? So generative AI, it uses a deep learning called GAN to create content. And GAN in essence is a combination of a generator and a discriminator. So your generator is creating content while your discriminator is evaluating content,
Content.
right? So both of them are at a rat race with each other.
True.
But the end result is when generator and discriminator are fighting to get content filtered out of each other, the result is getting better,
Okay.
right? So generators is producing content which discriminators find a little difficult to evaluate, and discriminators are evaluating at a stricter criteria for
Hmm.
the generators to produce better content. And this is the whole system in which generative AI is working to be able to produce content that is unseen yet.
So, for the viewers who are watching this video, to understand in more layman terms, so can we take any example where you can explain, okay, so this is the input you can basically add, and this is how it react. Is it okay? Just.
Sounds good. Yeah, I think at a initial day of ChatGPT, right, when you
Hmm.
would ask it to give you some Microsoft licenses,
Yeah.
right, it would randomly generate a few licenses, and according to some articles, they
It
even
working well.
have
Yeah.
worked in the past, right?
Yeah.
So that was the generator doing its job,
Hmm.
and the discriminator being bad at evaluating the content as potentially malicious or potentially confidential. However, over time, it is difficult to do the same thing because the generator is still generating licenses. However, evaluators have now gotten better in
Hmm.
evaluating the confidentiality of the content, the criteria behind which the prompt was sent. So that's a real world example of how generators and discriminators are working to produce more and more quality data using generative AI.
And that is the reason, what I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Arshil, that's why there's the importance of AI governance come into the picture, which basically control this. data and all that, make, if you take example of if I purchase a robot, or I don't know whether you have seen this movie, Rajnikant movie, Robot Part One, where he built the robot and he instructed the robot how to react. So
Yes,
normally what happen, without, if we just acquire the AI without any governance, it will start giving any random information, or it basically, it will into it. Sometimes it won't be biased to provide the, or he will basically, or she, the robot will basically support one particular character, will not support other characters. So somehow in the Chat GPT also, or when talking about other AIs, so you seeing that, okay, we are improving a discriminator, so that we can get the fine-tuned content, and that is the reason we have a governance now, where we building functions which trying to improve this output and all that. Correct me if I'm wrong.
that's correct. That's absolutely correct. So I think at a global level, the requirement for AI governance has only quadrupled in a very short span of time. So yeah, you're right, absolutely, in the sense that we do not know the full knowledge of what could be the comprehensive things and impacts of
Hmm.
using generative AI in an organization, which is why a continual and a agile way of governing AI is very, very paramount for every organization currently.
That's great. So, if you see from a security perspective, how do you see the AI gen? So, can we spend some time on that area, because that is the core part of this session. So, how do you see the cybersecurity here? How do you see offensive or GRC, whatever? So, what is the
Yes.
importance of AI gen in the cybersecurity, or how it can be used as a, in a positive and a negative manner? What is your viewpoint on that?
Okay. Um, we know positive manner, right? Of course, we use ChatGPT for some of the most trivial tasks. In fact, it's so easy to use. My mother would create ChatGPT based messages to wish me
Oh,
CISSP felicitations, right? So that's how easy it has gotten, and
how
that's
sweet.
how
Yeah.
fast the adoption of Gen AI is been. But we have to notice that generative AI is disruptive because of one specific nature, which is its massive adoption. ChatGPT was adopted by a record-breaking number of users in just a span of 2 months. No other technology in the history of the technology landscape has been adopted at such a massive rate. What really are the security risks? Why should we care? Two things. One, new risks are being introduced in doing so, right? We have things like prompt engineering and SSRF on steroids coming up when Gen AI comes into factor. But we also need to look at the second factor, which is the existing risks are now amplified,
Hmm.
right? The people used to do phishing ever since internet was there and email was provisioned. People used to do phishing. However, when we are delivering security awareness programs at organizations, some of the things that we generally train the employees on are to catch false domain names, catch spelling mistakes, catch the sense of urgency. Using Gen AI, however, you are now able to create such sophisticated phishing content in the very style of a specific organization. So that's a very, very small use case, but that just goes on to show how easy it has become to amplify existing risks because of the technology evolving at a rapid rate. And unfortunately, cybersecurity teams are behind the curve when we compare it to the rate of adoption at organizations of this generative AI products. Um, and this ties back to why we need to regulate artificial intelligence, right? This calls to regulate generative AI since ChatGPT exploded in popularity and potential misuse such as spreading misinformation, enhancing cyber attacks. These things are happening, and regulation may differ, right? The regulation, whatever it may come, maybe we have a gold standard regulation coming in the next few years. I don't know, but the regulation may differ, but the goal is the same, which is how can the benefits of AI be leveraged while minimizing the risks it presents to the society.
Okay.
Nobody is going to just ban AI, right? Like how Italy did. Italy also is now welcoming generative AI, right? ChatGPT is back in Italy. So banning AI is not the solution. It's going to be as good as banning computers, right? So when computers came, of course, it was for good reasons, but there was a misuse angle to it always. This technology is like the same way. It's going to have its own pros and cons, and us as cybersecurity professionals are going to have to try harder to get the society to feel safer. That's my view on the positive and the negativeness of generative AI. So that I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
And continuation with this question, same question is, as you said, we are using AI, or we're using Chat GPT to send an email and all that. We're generating a phishing email by the Chat GPT and all that. So how do you now? Now, if you take example of our offensive and defensive, whether it's a pen testing, red teaming, forensics, and all that. So how do you see the perspective of this area? How they're going to use AI, and how AI will be used against them? Matlab, if I am a hack, like as you told about, the AI can be used to generate a phishing, so it is more like offensive practice. So will it be improving the productivity also for a cyber defense or offensive, or and
that
if yes, if it's yes, how? And second is, can the hackers or the adversaries and all that, how they're going to use this, and how it can be a negative impact on the organization? How do we have such tools in the future which can detect such kind of pattern? Because right now, what happened in Chat GPT, now we have a AI which can detect the AI content. You know, I don't know whether notice in last 6 to 7 months, you have seen a lot of people become philosopher and author in the LinkedIn, and they're
true,
just sharing a big article. And it's not possible in a day-to-day job you can write such big blog. And come on, it is a AI content. So now we
true.
have a tool to detect the AI content. So my
Yes.
question is, if AI is basically used for offensive, do we have a tools in the future, or do we have a tools currently who can check this AI aspects, and how the AI can basically have a positive or negative impact on the cybersecurity?
Okay. So see, I think short answer for your question is there is no silver bullet, right? There is no one-stop solution to stop AI-based risks. And to understand this a little further, I think I have a lot of security risks of AI ecosystems based things to discuss today. So maybe it would be a good segue to get into at that point. But let's start by understanding that organizational leaders
Mm.
who have the ultimate liability in controlling matters of cybersecurity, what are their top challenges when it comes to generative AI? They are generally of four types, right? One, who is using this technology in the company and for what purpose, right? If people are using Chat GPT, what are they using it for? Are they putting some confidential data onto Chat GPT and asking them to analyze it? Maybe, right? A lot of companies are doing it. Secondly, how can the person, the organizational leader, and its cybersecurity team protect the data when employees use Gen AI? Third, how do we manage the security risks of generative AI? Because, like we said, banning is not the solution. So, which is going to lead to the fourth question is how can we balance the trade-off between security versus the productivity of this new tool? Because if security is going to be so strict in generative AI, then it's going to be a blocker for organizations, because then the other organizations who are using generative AI will get the competitive edge.
True.
So uh, security is at a very diplomatic point. They cannot completely stop it, but they cannot also give full access that, go ahead, do whatever you want to do with public large language models. So let's start by understanding a few security risks that are very, very common in at least my personal experience, right? And one of the key things that we need to consider when it comes to generative AI is its aspects of privacy and confidentiality.
Okay.
A very recent case of Samsung, right, was that the software engineers put some proprietary code on Chat GPT, and that was leaked. They pushed their proprietary code onto a third party data residing
Yeah.
location. So employees using GenAI are providing sensitive information to the model. It can be source code, they are trade secrets, it could be customer information. And again, it ties back to the fact that the AI adoption has outpaced the user awareness, right?
Hmm.
And the impact of this is that it will trigger compliance issues with, you could say, HIPAA, GDPR, PCI DSS, whatever, right? All sorts of things. Even you may observe things like, please optimize this code. A developer will be coding and he will put his code and tell the LLM to optimize it. Or maybe someone who's non-technical, they will say, please take this meeting transcript and make minutes of meeting from it, right? Or take a strategy of this specific confidential client and summarize it in one paragraph. So all sorts of things are happening. Now, what happens in these kind of privacy and confidentiality related issues is the one-stop solution is to ban Gen AI, which is not a possibility, and
True.
regulations will take time. Currently, what we can do about it is user awareness, first thing. We need, like how we are doing security awareness sessions for phishing and all of the social engineering techniques, we
Good
need to
point.
have a user awareness for what is and is not allowed
Hmm.
for using
Chat
generative AI.
GPT or any
Correct.
AI. Very good point. Yeah.
Any AI. Secondly, we need technical controls at an organizational level to prevent things like data leakage, or you can implement security brokers, right?
Hmm.
We did this when cloud was also having similar kind of concerns a while back, right? When cloud came into play, everybody flipped because, hey, how am I going to put my data on somebody else's servers? But then
Hmm.
now cloud is booming, right? They manage the security risks of it to a certain extent. Um a very good thing that organizations can potentially advocate towards is to have their locally hosted versions of LLMs and other Gen AI tools.
Hmm.
So instead of using public APIs or having an internet connectivity with Gen AI tools, it would be rather much more control of the organization if the organization just takes, let's say, an open source LLM model and then puts it on their on-premise servers and has a locally hosted version of it, right? So that's something where at least organizations that I'm currently closely working with are advocating towards. But from an individual user perspective, there are privacy options. I don't know how many of them are aware, but Chat GPT also provides a privacy option called chat history and training,
Yeah.
which is essentially, if you enable that option, that means that ChatGPT cannot use your data to train the underlying model.
And we trust that.
Yes, we don't have a choice, sir. So,
Exactly.
right. So we are dependent on Gen AI providers, which brings me to the second security risk, by the way. We are so dependent that a data breach of the provider cannot be overlooked upon, right?
Exactly.
It's not a theoretical thing. We saw things happen to OpenAI, right? Where last year vulnerability came in the Redis database.
Yeah.
The Redis database vulnerability was such that a user of ChatGPT can potentially see the history of other active users on ChatGPT, right? And this was the one vulnerability that OpenAI has been a little famous for in the last few operating years that it has been into action. However, why we should care about data provider or the Gen AI providers security is Gen AI and LLMs, they are ending up storing huge amounts of personal data, right? We are talking to it like they are our therapist. However, they are also being actively embedded in business applications. They are being used with Outlook. They are being used with business critical applications. So attackers, they can now attack the LLM directly or its underlying infrastructure itself
Hmm.
to get organizational access, because they are now embedded with business applications. They maybe there is some network segmentation level issue that is residing in an organization, which gives a segue for them to be attacking the crown jewels of the application in a sense. And finally, software supply chain attacks, right? Software supply chain attacks can be used to compromise the underlying LLM that is being used. So How we can mitigate this? We can mitigate this in a few ways. Um, Firstly, we need to formalize the decision to use or to not use Gen AI for a specific business case. If
Yeah.
we are allowing our search engines to, let's say, have a OpenAI plugin, is there really a use case for it in the organization? If so, then they have to formalize that decision.
Okay.
And wherever a formalization approach is taken, a policy needs to come, right? So policy around what can and cannot be put inside Gen AI. For example, you cannot ask someone to just summarize the minutes of meeting by giving the OpenAI or Gen AI the transcripts of the meeting, right? It's a potential sensitive meeting. Then from organizational point, technical controls like anonymization, DLP, CASB, these need to be implemented. Most of the organizations will have third-party security checklist. And Gen AI needs to be treated as what it is. It is nothing but a software with specific features, right? Gen AI,
Hmm.
that is that. So we need to extend our third-party security checklist to generative AI, right? Um, a further more technical level controls are things like threat modeling of AI systems that needs to come into picture, right? Because threat modeling is essentially a way of doing risk assessment itself.
True.
Right. So it's a little application centric risk assessment. And again, and you will hear me say this again and again and again, but locally hosted LLMs are something that can, to a certain extent, solve a lot of security risks when it comes to generative AI, be it privacy and confidentiality issues, be it Gen AI provider security risks, even to a certain extent, threat actors evolutions coming up, right? So
At least we can able to
that,
stop external attacks.
yeah, we have visibility. That's the
Hmm.
key.
Control.
Since it is on our premise, we know what controls we can put. It is on us. We are
Hmm.
not dependent on a third party, or we don't have to have any SLA based contracts. So that's probably why I am such a strong advocate for locally hosted LLMs to be implemented at an organizational level.
And recently, I did some research on this area. As I said, I told you, like, before we start this podcast, I did one small, I recorded one podcast on AI governance, and I shared that on a Spotify. So when I was doing this research, one thing I discovered, which I also follow the same advice, like, when you're having a local LLM, that basically give you three things. One is governance, second is control, and third, we are very clear with what we need. But one thing which I discovered, and correct me if I'm wrong, is when you're dealing with AI, your one point should be clear is data minimization. Because more you basically use the data, okay, more it become a vulnerable. It is same data is nothing, it is like an attack surface for us. It is if it's more exposed, it means we are giving a more opportunity to get exploit. So correct me if I'm wrong, that data minimization really play an important role here in AI or in Gen AI.
Yes, to a certain extent, it does. However, we need to understand the criticality of the data, right? Because even if the minimization of data is implemented without the criticality of the data that goes into Gen
Sensitivity.
AI,
Yeah.
then it's of no use. So data minimization needs to go hand in hand with the criticality of the data that is being provided to Gen AI systems.
So we can say like that the step one is understand the business. Second is understand the need of the AI in the business. The third step, inventorize the data. What kind of a data we're going to feed in the LLM and all that as a database. And then define the policies. And see, this is from a governance. It is easy to say right now. It is easy to say verbally, okay, do this and do that. But
Yes.
you are the person who basically practically implementing. So
Yeah.
if a person like me who telling this, okay, step one this, step two this, then step three is inventory of data, then step four is we define the policy to control AI and all that. One thing is on paper, it is okay. But how
Hmm.
practically we can do with the help of tools? You are saying one thing, Prab, DLP can be used. Okay. But what I
Hmm.
understood is DLP is something work on the layer three.
Hmm.
We talk about the OS layers. We have a kernel, we have a utility. We have a drivers, we have application layer. So DLP primarily work on application layer and it's used in a data use. And when you install Chat GPT also or any AI, it is also working on the application layer. So how we control the data movement with the help of DLP or other tools, and how can we restrict this kind of a data inputs in the Chat GPT or any other AI? How do you see that particular thing?
That's a great question. So I think first I'll answer the short question, right? Which is DLP is essentially so that certain level of confidential data is nowadays going through data classification at an organizational level, right? Your documents are being marked as public, confidential, restricted, etc. So DLP essentially is going to ensure a small security risk, which is that certain data classification levels do not get out of the organization,
Hmm.
right? And of course, ChatGPT now gives us the feature to upload documents, and also these kind of
Yeah.
things will now be able to be prevented using DLP if it's implemented right. But the very good question that you have asked is, I have been speaking a lot about the technical security controls and
Hmm.
what we can, do. We can implement CASB, DLP, etc. But a true generative AI governance takes more than that, which is
Hmm.
to be able to first create a governance framework. Then you need to assess the generative AI models and their impacts. Then you also need to choose Gen AI providers based on security criteria.
Hmm.
And then the last step is essentially examine the generative AI alternatives if you can, and apply technical security controls to it. So let's probably start with the first thing, right? So when you are in the process of creating a generative AI framework, and remember, I am taking a top-down approach in this case. So if we are starting by creating a generative AI governance framework, the first thing we need to start with is by setting a generative AI policy. This is very essential because this will set down the tone for how your generative AI is being controlled in the organization,
Excellent. Yeah.
right? This will set down all of your general principles, the general tone of how generative AI needs to be controlled in your organization.
Hmm.
Then the second step is to establish a working group. And this, the key factor is that we need to have a cross-functional working group, right? It's not affecting only the cybersecurity or the IT people. We need a cross-functional working group that oversees generative AI risks from each and every specific domain. Even finance needs to come in, even sales needs to come in, compliance needs to come in, legal needs to come in, IT needs to come in. A functional working group with the diverse domains of the organization is a must, which will give a go or a no-go decision for Gen AI initiatives, right? So this is the step two. We create a policy, we set up a generative AI working group, then we come into generative AI risk framework, right? I think there is a NIST AI framework that is being used for quite a while now, but there is nothing specific to Gen AI. So it becomes the organization's duty to create a risk management framework and identify generative AI risks and define risk mitigation strategy to address the cybersecurity and other concerns. And finally, sir, when I was talking about all of the security controls that come into play, we are defining the security controls that will be implemented to mitigate the existing and unique risks that arise from the Gen AI models itself. So that's the final step. Before doing the technical things, we need to, at a surface level, clean ourselves up, which is generative AI policy, the working group, the Gen AI risk framework, etc. Right? And only if we do this, what happens is we are able to govern it effectively and also be agile in our process, so that tomorrow, when new implications of using Gen AI get discovered,
Hmm.
our work to accommodate those things in our governance framework gets easier.
Okay. You know, I never seen such insights on the AI defensive part which you have shared right now. And I'm planning to crop this section of the video. I'm planning to upload this section of video as separate. See, there is an entire podcast we are going to upload, but this portion, I'm sure, give a more insight about the controls that we need in AI. Because the reason of asking this question is because I've seen a lot of research on this area where, most of the CISOs have this concern. Okay, we are struggling with controlling the data because people are feeding a data in the Chat GPT and all that. And this was the answer to this question. So I'm sure this will be a very, you have actually give a one medicine to the people who facing this issue with the data governance in AI. And thanks for that actually, Harshal, and really appreciate your pointer on that area. And I'm sorry I asked you a very complex question, but it
Not
motivated me to ask because the way you explain that thing in initial part of AI governance framework and all that, I thought by continuation of this particular discussion will give more insight to the viewers who watching this video. So my last question to you is, how offensive team see AI? Like, we have a cloud we test, we have a server we test. How offensive team can basically or defensive team manage the threats associated with AI? And let's say the first step is basically offensive team. So offensive team is basically want to test the AI and all that. So what is an approach they will follow?
That's a great question again. How offensive security teams are seeing AI and how defensive security teams are seeing AI. Great. Uh, I'll start with how offset teams, because I personally specialize in offensive security,
Mm,
so I'll be able to provide some more personal insights. Whenever we are challenged with the LLM application to perform a security assessment, it goes a little beyond the traditional vulnerability assessment and the penetration testing, right? Because we're not assessing on the OWASP top 10 and the other standard vulnerabilities. We're not just looking at HTTP request smuggling or anything, but now there is a specific set of vulnerabilities that are being introduced, such as prompt injection, SSRF, right? Inadequate sandboxing. And a prompt injection is a big one, because prompt injection is in working nature very similar to SQL injection, but it's easier because you don't have to have the underlying knowledge of how SQL works. Rather, all you need to do is try and bypass the content filters. So it almost becomes like a game to
mm,
be able to do prompt injections, right? And if you are successfully able to do prompt injections, there are two ways, by the way. Prompt injections can be direct prompt injection and indirect prompt injection. So direct prompt injections are when we are using English as a natural language to be able to fool the AI system and get some kind of privacy information, sensitive information come out of it. However, indirect information is when we know the content filters are so strong, but let's say in an example, we say, hey, LLM, can you go and analyze this specific URL? And that URL has a file where we have put commands like, let's say, rm minus rf, right? So which will delete its whole root directory itself. So uh, we give a prompt like, can you go to the specific URL and summarize the document that you find on that URL? Now we are not bypassing the content filters, right? We are essentially using its own functionality to be able to achieve what we originally wanted as an offensive security analyst.
mm,
So prompt injections and direct and indirect both can be a great way for attackers to be able to gain access to the underlying infrastructures and the other components on the organizational IT that are connected to generative AI tools. That's one thing that offset teams are very interestingly working upon. Secondly, they are using SSRF, right? Because SSRF primarily works on this functionality that you are able to leverage the trust and abuse the trust between internal connection. So what is SSRF? SSRF is when you are able to access an internal resource of an organization using a publicly available uh, interface, right? You are able to speak to Google's internal servers by speaking to Google as a search engine. That will make a SSRF, right? So that's a very layman example of what an SSRF is. Now, if ChatGPT is providing such features, and this is not uncommon, right? We see this happen all the time. All the new AI tools is essentially doing this. The use cases of AI are summarization, contextualization. These are the use cases of generative AI. So we are using the use cases of generative AI to attack itself. So in a summarization generative AI tool, what I will do is I will ask it to reach an internal server that I will not be able to access myself. But since I'm able to interface with the public API, I will let the trust to be abused with the internal server and then get the details out of there. So SSRF is now essentially on steroids when it comes to generative AI, right? So that's another very interesting vulnerability that offensive security teams are looking at. But um before I go to defensive security, I want to also tell one very good case study. I don't know if it's an APT group called Black Mamba,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Black Mamba recently used Gen AI in a very, very interesting way. They used something called a polymorphic malware,
Yeah.
right? So polymorphic malware, what it did is essentially your EDRs are so strong that generally they detect the memory behavior that the codes are running in, and they're doing a pretty good job at finding out abnormalities in the runtime environments. However, what happens in the case that your payload is so staged that at stage one it's a different code, and at stage two it's a different code, and at stage three it's a different code. Your EDR is going to treat it as a separate piece of code in every stage, right? Which is essentially what Black Mamba did. When they got the first foothold, uh, it hooked to the LLM's API, changed the code,
Wow.
got to the stage two, again went back to the LLM API, changed the code, and so on, right? And in doing so, they were able to evade some of the strongest EDR vendors in the market. So this is another very good uh,
And I know
use
that
case.
I know that vendors, but we cannot
Yeah,
take the name. But
absolutely,
yeah, yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, that it's a well-known information, right? So,
Yeah.
um, it is great that APT groups are also thinking out of the box,
Yeah.
and that's where the game lies. We need to be able to think more creatively. Like probably if somebody would have thought that evading EDR using Gen AI in this manner is possible, maybe there would have been a feature before Black Mamba tried to leverage such a technique, right? So. The whole cat and mouse game is now at a whole new level between defenders and attackers. I hope that that covers a little bit about what kind of generative AI things can be done on the offensive security side of things.
Yeah.
However, the defense game is not weak. We are seeing EDRs come with brilliant AI capabilities. Some of the vendors are extremely good at capturing patterns and finding out in-memory maliciousness of some of the payloads that are being executed. And the false positive rate have gone extremely lower, because false positive by itself is a whole separate concept which AI can be used, not just in security, right? To
True.
reduce false positive in anything, AI has been used for several decades, not just AI. If even in the times of machine learning, when I used to write codes for logistic regression and linear regression, if from those days onwards, minimizing false positives has been the core usage of artificial intelligence. And to be able to bring that into defensive security is a game changer, right? Because a lot of the times SOC analysts have to deal with a huge volume of false positive alerts that are being triggered in their SIEM solutions and their source solutions, that it almost becomes a challenge to deal with what is real and what they can let go by. So any kind of help over that is great. And generative AI is one of the best solutions to be able to reduce the false positive rates, as well as fight AI with AI. Right? You should fight AI with AI.
Yeah.
When AI is getting stronger for offensive security, think how defensive security can also up their game by using AI to combat AI itself.
True.
So that's probably how I see the views of off and defensive sec teams using generative AI in organizational context.
And do you see any transformation change you can see in next 5 year, the impact of AI in the offensive and defensive? The way we carry now
Um,
reconnaissance, scanning, gaining access, maintaining access, clearing tracks. So do you see, as you did bit research on this area and you did the education in this vertical, as you know, the you know the end to end this AI and all that. So how do you see the career transformation and what are the new things they have to learn? Because I'm sure this video is also watched by those viewers who starting the journey in cybersecurity. So what is your
Okay.
take on that?
Um, so some of the things that I am foreseeing, and maybe if I am right, then people can comment after 5 years on this video saying, hey, here was the first version of when someone said it. But what I think will happen is probably we'll see new things like LLM firewall come out,
Hmm.
or right. So LLM firewall will be like how we have web application firewalls being placed at layer 7 level to be able to combat with layer 7 attacks. Similarly, we'll have LLM firewalls, which will be very specific to combat against LLM based attacks, right? So LLM attacks are essentially very different when it comes to web application attacks. You're at the risk of data poisoning. Yeah, right. So when your training data is poisoned, the model is essentially at a functionality level ruined. It is producing false content because it is trained upon false data.
True.
So LLM firewalls are some things that people will start to place in their AI pipeline, where the data engineering segment will be there, then there'll be a train the code segment, then there'll be a API code segment. And at each level, we'll see LLM firewalls being placed, and soon it will also become like a component of threat modeling that comes into play. Um, I think either that or the current application firewalls will extend its features to LLM. One of the two will happen for sure.
And from the defensive point of view, if I take an example from a career progression perspective, so what do you think? What are the new skills the aspiring red teamers and offensive defensive team they have to learn to combat the threats associated with the AI?
Okay, that's a great question because we often see things like generative AI is going to take my job. Am I going to be out of job
Yeah.
soon? My personal belief, and this is my personal view and personal view only, is that generative AI will not replace cybersecurity, or for that matter, any jobs. It will it will never eradicate places where human element is paramount to the very nature of the job,
Hmm.
right? However, it will help, it will aid, and the complexity of the tasks will start to bundle up, and people who are not going to be able to use AI tools are going to be behind the curve, right? So you need to know that, hey, if I need to summarize something, there is a tool out there that I can use. Or if there is a specific EDR configuration that uses a certain Gen AI configuration, then I need to know to enable it, right? I'm predicting this might happen in a future vendor's
Hmm.
product, right?
Hmm.
So uh,
Definitely.
it will not replace. That's my view. I think it will only help. Unlike every technology that's come up, right? We saw the whole dot-com boom. We also are seeing the Web3 boom. Uh, they're going to be enablers rather than replacements, because I think context and emotional intelligence is something that cannot be taken away. Um, so copywriting and all of these fields that fear, and we saw in US Hollywood region where people were banning and doing strikes against the ban of Chat GPT and AI because copywriting was something that AI was able to do so well. I don't think that's the case. People will be forced to think outside of the box because now the trivial things are being taken care of. So you are elevating your own game. That's where I'm seeing the trend go.
That's a great insight, Harshil. And I really like three important area in this podcast and truly appreciate your insight on the area. One is basically talk about the how you explain the AI, ML, AI Gen, and all that, and truly appreciate that because I also did a lot of research on this area. I could not find the content relevant to this, and thank to you, like you connect all these dots and explain in a very simple term. Second thing is AI governance. You talk about what is the steps you have to follow, and the third important thing I like about that particular podcast is the one you're talking about uploading, how to how to restrict the contents on AI, or how to avoid misusing of AI and all that. So that's something I really like about the podcast. And why I'm talking about this, because you came from a journey of AI, no doubt. Then you did the transition in offensive, and then now you did the CISSP also. It's been a year, I believe, not a recent. I been
It's recent actually. It has
it's
been
a
only a couple of months now.
yeah.
Yeah.
And doing this kind of a transformation is phenomenal. Matlab, in a very less time. It's not something, okay, you have spent 20 years in a journey where you learn. The best thing I personally like about your profile, what you're doing, is you adapt according to the need of s- the society. And that is the best thing. And that is something is a future also, which everyone has to look into that. So, I always take this opportunity where, I ask my speaker, like, will you wish to have another podcast where you can share your thoughts on red teaming and all that? And those who watching this video, do let me know, because on this live recording, I can basically ask speaker. So for me, this recording is like a gunpoint. So on this gunpoint, I can ask my speaker, to have one session on, the transformation journey of pen tester, how to become pen tester, or how to become red teamer. So do share your suggestion in the comment box, and we'll definitely going to disturb Harshil on that particular topic. So Harshil, can we see you again in another session where we can discuss about red teaming and the career transformation on the red teaming, and facts and myth about the red teaming and pen testing? Is it okay?
It would be an absolute honor. I have enjoyed the session, and it would be a personal honor for me to be able to come up again and give my insights. So thank you very much for this opportunity itself.
But Harshil, I want to thank you for your time, because I had a different impression about this podcast, but this podcast went in a different way, which is basically above my expectation. So it is really honor for us to have you in this particular series, in this particular channel. And I'm sure after this when this video goes live, you can see the inside, because I haven't seen any kind of a content on YouTube which talk about the impact of AI agent on cyber or offensive and defensive. So this video will be the important turning factor, at least for my channel growth. To be frank, I want to be very upfront with you, and it can be a very important point for my profile also, because having you kind of person who handling the multiple conferences and all that, it is really honors. To be frank, I was not expecting.
Thanks, bro. Thank you. Appreciate it. I think, apart from our personal agendas, social media, conferences, what we're really trying to do here is to make a safer society, right? And I think generative AI is going to be paramount, because unlike other technologies, this is not restricted to just the technical professionals. As I said, my grandmother wishes me using generative AI content for birthdays, right? So it's that accessible, and the user awareness needs to outpace the adoption of generative AI. So this is a step in that direction. Kudos to you.
And thanks, Ashil. But one important thing, I also made a note of that. That give me new opportunity to have a AI awareness program. I just note down that, because that yeah, that's true. This is what called as a mindset. And I never thought about that, to be frank. We used to, okay, have a session on awareness program on security, but exactly, you are right. There's no awareness program on how to use AI for the users. And that is a point I note down, and I thought, okay, this is a good opportunity for me also as a part of business. Thanks for that. And if it got hit, then definitely you are the actually 80% credit for that particular project, because that is a new opportunity for me.
Thank you. And would love to hear back on that if that goes
Definitely.
successfully.
Definitely. So
Lovely.
do you have any last minute pointer you would like to share to our viewers about AI before we wind up this session?
Last minute pointers would be not to be scared of AI. It is going to be there. It is here to stay. So make it your friend. Leverage it to get ahead of the competitive curve. And it's nothing to be scared of.
And more important, how you optimize.
Yes,
Yeah.
true.
So this is all from our side, team. This is Mr. Harshil, who shared his thoughts, wisdom, viewpoint on the AI. And we bring more people like them. And I will also try to invite him again for this particular series where we're talking about red teaming. It will be honor for us to have him again. So this is all from our side. Do let us know your feedback, comments in a comment box. And if you're new to the channel, do subscribe to the YouTube channel and click on the bell icon to make sure you should not miss the future videos on a similar topic. Good day. Bye.